Welcome to Star Watch Now, your front row seat to all the hottest gossip, drama, and breaking news from the world of entertainment. If it's trending, shocking, or star-studded, we're covering it. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Have you ever seen a superstar covered in mud, soaked in blood, and still choosing to remain silent? This is not a story about fame. This is a story about something far rarer. A quiet kind of courage, buried beneath the noise of stardom. Today on Star Watch Now, we uncover what Wang Yibo's blood-stained gloves and moldy rubber shoes really revealed about the man behind the spotlight. They weren't meant to be seen. Not by the cameras, not by the press, not by fans scrolling for the next trending headline. But the gloves, stained dark red with blood, refused to stay quiet. It happened during a race at the Zhuhai circuit, an ordinary day for most, but one that would leave a mark unseen by headlines. A rider crashed violently on the track. Within seconds, amidst the confusion and chaos, someone moved. It wasn't the medics. It wasn't a race official. It was Wang Yibo. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees, tore open his flame-resistant suit, and pressed both hands onto the injured rider's wound to slow the bleeding. His gloves soaked quickly with blood, the kind that clings under your nails and stays long after it's washed away. 47 seconds later, the medical team arrived. By then, he had already stepped back. No dramatic exits, no lingering glances, no interviews. There were no front-page stories, no official statements. In fact, had it not been for a dashcam recording from a distant corner of the track, the world may never have known what happened that day. And perhaps that was his intention all along. It wasn't an act performed for the lens. It wasn't a role rehearsed for applause. It was instinct, raw, urgent, and deeply human. And perhaps that's why it matters even more. In a world where fame often demands a performance, where even kindness is sometimes curated, moments like these remind us that some people still move not for credit, but because their conscience tells them to. These weren't gloves made for spotlight. They were meant to protect, to serve, to act. They were worn not by an idol on stage, but by a man in a moment of quiet responsibility. He left before anyone could ask questions. He didn't want to be the hero of the story, but the blood didn't lie. The gloves told their own truth of a man who, even in a culture of image and branding, still chooses action over attention. And maybe, in that silent choice, he revealed more about himself than any press release ever could. Of all the things that could reveal a person's character, it was a pair of old, mold-covered rubber shoes that spoke the loudest. Not a designer suit, not a grand speech, just shoes, worn down, waterlogged, and quietly telling a story no one was meant to hear. It was during the floods in Xinjiang. The rain had pounded relentlessly for days, leaving homes drowned, roads broken, and families desperate. In the early hours of the morning, while most were asleep or glued to their screens, a figure in a fluorescent green rescue suit moved through the temporary supply center like a shadow, lifting crates, organizing blankets, handing out bottles of water. There were no cameras following him, no entourage, no microphones. Only mud, exhaustion, and urgency. His face was hidden beneath a cap and a soaked surgical mask, making him nearly unrecognizable. And maybe that was the point. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't want it. But someone noticed the shoes. Old, cracked, and covered in mold from prolonged exposure to water. It was such a small detail, but one so strangely out of place on a disaster site usually filled with rugged boots and issued uniforms. The shoes struck a memory. A local volunteer, staring at the man's back, whispered, "I think that's Wang Yibo." The idea sounded absurd at first. What would a global celebrity be doing here, at 3 a.m., in rubber shoes that hadn't seen care in years? And yet, the more people looked, the more certain they became. It wasn't his face they recognized. It was his way of moving, the way he bent down to hand a child a dry blanket, the silent nod he gave to the elders, the quiet efficiency that had nothing to prove. In that moment, the mold on his shoes became more meaningful than any designer logo ever could. It wasn't poverty that had worn them down. It was persistence, humility, a refusal to turn acts of kindness into headlines. He didn't stay long. By the time someone pulled out a phone, he had already gone. No footage, no glory, only the memory of shoes that had walked through floodwater, not to be seen, but to serve. And that, perhaps, was the clearest sign of who he truly is. Pain is often invisible in the world of entertainment. What audiences see are perfect takes, seamless performances, and polished final cuts. They don't see the bruises beneath costumes, the tremble in limbs just before another try, or the quiet moments when someone decides not to give up again. But sometimes the numbers speak. And in Wang Yibo's case, that number was 273. It was for a promotional shoot tied to the Winter Olympics. The scene required a triple axel, a complex ice skating move that demands both athletic precision and emotional fluidity. Yibo, never formally trained in figure skating, took on the challenge not because it was easy, but because it was real. What followed was an endless cycle of attempt and failure. He fell once, then 10 times, then 100. Still, he kept going. The count reached 273, a number too exact to be fictional, too painful to be fabricated. There was no crowd cheering him on, no immediate reward waiting at the end. Just the cold sting of the ice, the dull ache in his body, and the silent weight of expectation. But in those falls, something else was taking shape, something not choreographed, not performed. Endurance. Each fall was not a failure. It was a decision. To rise, to repeat, to believe that growth could come not from talent, but from tenacity. In a world that celebrates overnight success and effortless excellence, his persistence stood out like a quiet rebellion. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to be honest. When the final take was captured, flawless and filled with grace, it wasn't just the result of perfect timing. It was the product of 273 imperfect moments, stacked one over the other, stitched with grit and the refusal to settle. The director later called it self-torture training, half joking. But there was something reverent in his tone. He had watched a man choose to struggle when shortcuts were available. He had seen pain transformed into movement, and movement into meaning. In those countless falls, Wang Yibo revealed something rare. Not just a pursuit of perfection, but a deep, deliberate embrace of imperfection. The kind that doesn't show up in highlight reels, but lingers long after the screen fades to black. For a promotional shoot ahead of the Winter Olympics, Wang Yibo attempted a complex triple axel on ice. He fell. Then he fell again. And again. 273 times. Most people would give up by 30. But the director said something quietly unforgettable. He wasn't chasing the perfect take. He was chasing what it meant to not quit. Was that performance? Maybe. But those bruises on his knees? Real. At a school for hearing-impaired children in Zhengzhou, he sat silently beside a girl struggling with confidence. She reached out, placed her hand gently on his throat, and spoke for the first time. There were no paparazzi, just security footage. It wasn't scripted, but it became one of the most powerful scenes of his career. He gave her a voice, a teacher said, without saying a word. You may not have heard of this yet. Wang Yibo recently funded a hidden campaign in rural Guizhou, called the Lantern Project, providing portable solar lanterns to children who walk miles through mountainous terrain each night just to study. He didn't attach his name to it, until a boy wrote, "Thank you, Teacher Wang," in charcoal on the wall of his hut. The only light source, a gift, glowing beside it. Now, teachers call him the silent patron of the village. In a private message to a struggling young fan battling depression, he replied with a message 3,257 words long, sent at 2:03 a.m. It wasn't empty comfort. It wasn't vague inspiration. It was raw, honest, ugly, beautiful. He wrote, "I've cried too, but sometimes sweat on the dance floor looks like stardust under light." That message, saved by the fan, has now become a lifeline for thousands who have read it quietly, in the dark. So, what did the blood-stained gloves and moldy rubber shoes reveal? Not a headline, not a PR stunt. They revealed a man who believes in doing, not just appearing. In trying even when no one is watching. In kindness without audience applause. Maybe that's the most revolutionary thing a celebrity can do today. If the story touched you, even in the smallest way, Glowing Star, subscribe to Star Watch now to keep discovering the hidden human side of stars we thought we knew. Red Heart, leave a comment and tell us which part of the story moved you most. You never know who might need to read it. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in quiet heroes.